aside from really introducing the English-speaking world to modern acting, and being a superstar, being the only actor who is a superstar to this day, not only on the stage but on the screen. He brought the method. He introduced, uh, without going into a lot of detail, Stanislavski was his friend and mentor, and really nobody knew that until I just, happened to discover 200 of his letters in the New York Public Library. But he knew Stanislavski very well and revered him, and brought this kind of modern acting into his method. Uh, so I think he's the first to really demonstrably bring method acting to the screen.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. The Barrymore name is synonymous with Hollywood royalty, but long before Drew Barrymore became a household name, there was John Barrymore, one of America's greatest and most complicated actors. Known as the Prince of Players, John Barrymore conquered Broadway and Hollywood, brought Shakespeare to modern audiences, and became a pioneering film star. But behind the brilliance was a turbulent personal life marked by fame, failed marriages, alcoholism, and personal demons. Today, I'm talking with acclaimed film biographer and historical journalist Terry Chester Shulman. He's author of Barrymore, The Spectacular, Tumultuous Life of America's Prince of Players, about the man behind the legend and the remarkable legacy he left behind. The book, published by the University Press of Kentucky, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And you can follow Terry on Facebook and Instagram. And Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. You had so many opportunities to pick a subject because that's your genre. Well, why did you decide John Barrymore particularly, as opposed to the entire Barrymore family, both present and past, or some other famous family? I know you wrote about the Costellos. So let's start with that basis. Why did you decide to write about John Barrymore?
Well, for several reasons. One, I knew who he was when I was 8 years old because I was a monster kid. For your listeners and viewers out there who don't know what monster kids are, we were obsessed with Hollywood monsters, and we had our own magazine, our own national magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland. And none of us knew that, because it was before social media, so none of us knew that any of the others were out there. But it turns out Leonard Maltin was a monster kid, Guillermo del Toro was a monster kid. We were all fascinated and obsessed with monsters. And because John Barrymore made Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1920, I knew who he was at a very young age. And also, just the story itself, I would say that most of the Golden Age Hollywood actors come from rather humble beginnings, like Clark Gable's father was a oil wildcatter, and Jimmy Stewart's father owned I think it was a hardware store. But it's this epic story that there's 100 years of really fascinating and important theater history from the Drew family, hence the name Drew Barrymore, that stretches back 100 years before he's even born. So it's a big story, and what I discovered that I really didn't realize is you can't just write about John Barrymore. When you're writing about John Barrymore, there's his illustrious siblings, Lionel and Ethel, and his famous parents, Maurice Barrymore and Georgie Drew Barrymore before that. So it's this huge story. And why, if had I known what I was taking on then, I might have thought twice. Because it's really, it's an overuse. The word epic story is overused, but his really is.
How long did it take you to research the material, and then how long did it take you to write the material? Because again, you said it's epic, so.
Yeah. I wrote a book about the Costello family called Film's First Family, not Elvis Costello,
Right.
but
And not Lou Costello.
and not Lou Costello,
Okay.
but Maurice Costello photoplay called the first recognizable a movie star, which he really was. And his famous daughters, Helene, who starred in the very first all-talking picture, Lights of New York, and Dolores, who ended up marrying John Barrymore. So, really, it's been a 10-year saga, the writing of these books, but specifically Jack, and we call him Jack because it's impossible to not be in a first name basis with the Barrymores because there's so many of them. Nobody's going to know who you're talking about if you just say Barrymore. So yeah, Jack's story took me about 6 years altogether.
Mhm. When you researched it, I always ask most of my guests who are writing biographies, did you have a chance? And now, because this family goes back so many generations, there are some current people, including Drew. Did you get a chance to talk to any family members or hangers-on from any elements of the Barrymore family?
Yes, I certainly did. My initial objective was to interview Jack's living and still living daughter, um, Dee Dee Barrymore, Dee Dee Barrymore Bedell. And she was 86 at the time. She's now 96, but she's very reclusive and had never given on purpose a major interview. So I thought, well, that's, a lofty goal. And it took me a while, but I finally did interview her. And she's the last living link to John Ethel and Lionel Barrymore, the royal family of the stage and screen. And she doesn't have many clear memories of Jack because he left when she was 4.5, but she does have some very, very startling and interesting memories, particularly when he was sort of barred from seeing his kids, but he kind of he did his best to pay them a visit in 36 when Dee Dee was 6.
Mhm.
And that's the whole story that's in the book, and it's a very sad one because once he was told that his son wasn't there, he sat down in a chair with his head in his hands, and Dee Dee was standing in the curve of the piano, as she remembers. It's just 4 feet away from him, and he didn't notice her. He didn't even know that she was there. So that visit, and then he left. So, that visit could have been the only time that they connected that she remembered, but all she remembers is him sitting in that chair with his head in his hands and in a moment of sorrow. But still, it's a fascinating, it's a great and terrible piece of history, of Barrymore history.
One more question about in this realm, and then we'll go on. But I'm intrigued by the fact that you worked at it to get the interview. Was it one thing that convinced her to sit down with you or talk on the phone, however she did it, so that she obviously checked you out to make sure you were legit, number one, but there must
Yeah.
have been some other element that caused her to agree.
Right. Well, she's I'm putting this diplomatically, she's extremely changeable and mercurial. And it started out, oh well, he can come stay with me and we'll talk, and I'll tell him anything he wants to know, and I can't wait to meet him too. I never want to hear his name mentioned again. There's no way I'm ever going to talk to him. Um, so it's a long story, but her children and I became friends, and finally they kind of wore her down. And
Good way to do it.
yeah, and we ended up having um, maybe hundreds of hours all told of interviews, um, and so I was able to get her on the record finally after it took me a long time.
Were you able to record or just write notes?
No, I wrote it down, but I'm
Oh,
I'm I'm a pretty quick writer.
okay,
So
good. Well,
yeah.
what surprised you most about the man? Once you started to get into the research and you're talking with people, what surprised you most about the man?
Well, the whole point of this book became to bring him out from behind this cloud of notoriety and gossip mongering that really plagued his legacy, uh, even before his death in 1942, and kind of reintroduce him as this really, and I think it'd be hard to get anything but this impression from reading this book that he was, in fact, the single most influential and important actor of the 20th century. And I realize that's saying an awful lot, but it's true on so many levels. In 1920 alone, he co-created the first modern classic horror film, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we were talking about before, and created the first modern prosthetic creature effect with his makeup, which was the same year that he reintroduced Shakespeare to the 20th century with Richard III. So that's just one year. He brought Stanislavski's um, system gave birth to the method. So he was method acting. It's very clear in his early uh, sound films, essentially, that that's exactly what he's doing. He brought the character into himself. I like to think of it that most of his contemporaries brought themselves into the character. You can always see Bogart, and Gable's always kind of Gable, even though, but Jack's versatility and his ability to become these very disparate characters really stands out, and it's why he made 6 movies in 1932, and all characters. He played comedy, he played tragedy, completely different characterizations because he could, and that's why George Cukor and David Selznick and Thalberg wanted him because he was so unique in that way that he could really play any character.
Do you think that he thought about his legacy in film with all his private demons and everything else going on? Do you think he thought about far enough into the future of what people would think of his films?
I don't think so, but he was certainly determined um, to have a very unique legacy as a theater actor, because it wasn't enough for him to play Richard on Broadway and then Hamlet on Broadway, but he had to bring it. He had to take the acid test, which was to bring his Hamlet to London.
Well, also the
To
acetate,
I'm sorry,
and also the acetate
the
as a
acid.
film.
Oh, right. Yes, that's true. But he didn't consider film as significant to his legacy as he did the theater.
Okay.
And I mean, he did an amazing and really daring thing because his producer, Arthur Hopkins, said, "I'm not going to finance you or have anything to do with you if you try to play Hamlet in London because they'll eat you alive." So, not to be deterred, he produced, directed, financed, and of course starred in it. And who was in the audience but Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud, and they were transformed because um, Shakespeare before that, Shakespearean characters were portrayed by, the 19th century way, which is this very exaggerated, almost operatic way of presentation. It wasn't real, it wasn't natural. And really for the first time, Hamlet was portrayed and came came across as a real human being. And that's kind of the heart of Jack's legacy as a theater actor. So that really mattered to him. And once he did that, having no new worlds to conquer, he sort of lowered himself into making movies, really because he wanted to, they were all very bad when it came to money and staying solvent. So they paid him his first contract with Warner Brothers was $76,500 a picture, which was an astronomical amount of money in 1925. Um, and so that was really his primary motivation, uh, where it was mostly financial. It's why all of them eventually went into film because theater didn't pay them enough to support their lavish and spendthrift ways. Um, so I don't think he really thought of his legacy as a film actor nearly as much as a theater actor.
Did he think of himself within the constellation of the family, or did he think of himself as a singular actor?
Well, both. They had a very complicated, the three siblings had a very complicated, excuse me, and competitive uh, relationship. Um, there's the whole dynamic that siblings have, but on top of that, they competed each other for glory and recognition, both in the theater and on film. So yes, they were extremely. It's most apparent uh, in Lionel and Jack's screen appearances together. They made four, and they're obviously trying to upstage the other. In Night Flight, Lionel, as he's leaving the scene, as he's leaving the room, he scratches his butt, and and they were, so they were always trying to get the last word in terms of audience attention. So they're very competitive with each other in that way.
Besides the family itself, what about the family name? Was he conscious of the family name?
Yeah, well, well, not him so much, but Ethel and Lionel basically exaggerated and said that they came from a long line of Barrymore of previous ancestral Barrymores, which was not true. Their father's name was Herbert Blythe, and he stole the name Barrymore from a playbill at the Haymarket, featuring an actor who named William Barrymore, who stole his name. His name was actually William Blewett, and he stole the name Barrymore. So I think it's hard for people to realize today in what low regard actors were thought of, uh, at one time, and the name Barrymore lent them kind of a pedigree and a sort of dignity that actors didn't have in the 19th century.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, by using a name like Barrymore, it sounds
Yeah.
elegant as opposed to Smith or Jones or whatever it is.
And there were the Earls of Barrymore. And the third Earl was loved the theater and was an amateur actor. And this William Blewett character worked for him as best of anybody's knowledge as a sort of court jester and became an actor and took that name and on down the line. Um,
When you were,
so what, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
It was a noble name, and they've died out since apparently, but at one time they were a noble family.
So when you were looking at the research and you had to make decisions along the way, what to include, what to exclude, was that for you a tedious process or was it a love of what you do because you are obviously
Well,
a
yeah, yes, it was because I was only allowed as most writers are a certain amount of space, a certain number of words, and a certain finite time period in which to compile it all into a book. So, I mean, I could have gone on and on. I could have gone on and on about the films. No other previous biographer has really had access to all the films, all the sound films, because of the digital age, which they didn't have the advantage of. A lot of them wrote about these films never having actually seen them or omitted them, entirely. But
Mhm.
I treat all the plays, all the films. I try to do it briefly so not to bore the reader. And I try to pick out sort of the meat from the stories of the films and the backstories of them and the plays. And there's some great backstories.
When he made the transition from silent film to talking movies, talking pictures, was there, he had obviously brought skills and
Yes.
insight from that era into it. So he had
Good point.
somewhat of an advantage over other performers in that genre. Um,
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about that, what you found out in your research and writing of the book?
Well, he was a shoe-in for the sound era, while silent stars were dropping like flies. He had this beautiful voice and this beautifully stage-trained voice um, that was just a natural for the sound era. So he just was kind of swept up in the updraft of interest in actors who sounded who could speak well. And so many, obviously, so many of the silent stars didn't have to measure up in the voice department, but he had long since done that. He really had in that time in the early 30s, his reputation was simply as America's greatest actor. So he had advantages that really none of the others had, at least to the same extent. So he that makes him unique
Was
among
he, based on your research, though, was he a prima donna on the set, or would he help other actors who might be struggling a little bit just because it's a new medium at that point in sound?
That's a good question. He was not. His sister Ethel was much more of a prima donna. But he was very chummy with the crew and very accessible. And interestingly, as difficult as he was as a husband, he was extremely gracious to his wives in helping them to further their careers on stage and screen. So it's an interesting paradox. I mean, if a man so much as smiled at any of his wives or girlfriends, he would go into a dark depression and drink and interrogate them. What did he say to you? What did he say to you? But on the opposite side of that, he really went to huge lengths to help them in their careers. All four of his wives benefited hugely from his influence.
I never forget a question, you somewhat answered it, but not totally. And that was, you mentioned he was very chummy with the crew, but my question was, did he help other actors on the set who might be struggling with that new medium?
Oh, well, he helped Katharine Hepburn, which her first film was A Bill of Divorcement in 1932. And yes, he was very helpful, and very very gracious to his, which isn't to say that there was any scene that he didn't try to or could in fact steal.
Oh, yes.
Um, you know, there's this great scene in Marie Antoinette where he plays Louis the 15th, where it's only a minute and a half, and it's him going up against Robert Morley, this young, brilliant British actor. But he manages to if you watch it, it's very short, but he just rips it right out of Morley's hands because he's just such a presence as the dying king that you can't take your eyes off of him.
Were
Um,
the other actors, when he would do that, were the other actors aware that he stole the scene?
Well, Lionel was. I don't think any of the actors were that concerned, but Lionel locked him during. It's the only time that the three Barrymores ever appeared together. That includes professionally.
Mhm.
They did some benefits in the theater, but as professional actors, they appeared together one time and one time only, and that's in the film Rasputin and the Empress. And Lionel plays Rasputin and has this big, juicy, incredibly meaty part, and plays this sort of stiff nobleman. He makes up for it in this great fight scene that I mean, some of it are doubles, but some of them are the brothers really really going at it with Jack cudgeling Lionel, saying, "Why don't you die?" And then dragging him across the ice and throwing him in the freezing river. Um, but they were competitive with each other in that way. But as far as I know, not with any other actors.
And the book
He
again
did
is
it
called,
outside. Go ahead.
and the book again is called Barrymore, The Spectacular Tumultuous Life of America's Prince of Players. When you got
Yes.
close to finishing the book, was there something that came down the pike that you were thought you could use again, but it was too late because of the deadline for getting the book in? Was there a piece that came in unexpectedly, or were you able to get the important stuff in there?
Well, one thing I almost was unable to include, and that was this great discovery that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't make. Someone brought it to my attention. Actually, the mother uh, of the Lone Ranger's daughter, Dawn Moore, was named Sally Allen. But before she married Clayton Moore, who became the Lone Ranger
Right.
on TV, she, as it turns out, was John Barrymore's final romantic relationship. And nobody knew about it, even me. And somehow I missed it. There were some newspaper coverage of that, but I had no idea. And she brought it to my attention. I was able to tell that story. And it's, that's a great story only because she authenticated it with scrapbook photographs of them together at a ranch in California that no one had ever seen that I was able to use. So that all got in under the wire, and I almost didn't get that in, but it had to be included.
Absolutely. Where was the basic bulk of your research located at? Was it at a UCLA or USC in terms of special collections, or was it somewhere else?
Well, that's a great question for future nonfiction writers or biography writers in particular, because it's a whole new world now in the digital age. You used to have to go to these libraries, the Library of Congress or the Herrick Library, and in Beverly Hills, and just fly all over the place, kind of trawling for information. But now you get a subscription to newspapers.com. It's not expensive. And you type in the name John Barrymore, and it explodes basically with thousands and thousands of references in every newspaper practically that where his name ever appeared. So it's much easier now. You really don't have to go flying all over the place. There's another resource called Lantern Media History, which is all the fan magazines have been digitized. So and before you may not have you just hope to stumble on something. You couldn't really target or pinpoint, I want to know about this time and that time. But now it's just a mouse click away.
Yeah, very impressive. Did you have to print any of that out, or just save it on in your computer and then just bring it up?
Save it in my computer. You don't have to you don't
You've
have to
definitely
do that.
adapted to the 21st century, no doubt about it. Before I let you go, what do you think is John or Jack Barrymore's most important legacy today?
Well, I think, I mean, aside from really introducing the English speaking world to modern acting, and being a superstar, being the only actor who is a superstar to this day, not only on the stage but on the screen. He brought the method. He introduced, uh, without going into a lot of details, Stanislavski was his friend and mentor, and really nobody knew that until I just, happened to discover 200 of his letters in the New York Public Library. But he knew Stanislavski very well and revered him, and brought this kind of modern acting uh, into his method. Uh, so I think he's the first to really demonstrably bring method acting to the screen. And I think that's a huge thing.
Well, I think that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been acclaimed film biographer and historical journalist Terry Chester Shulman, author of Barrymore, The Spectacular Tumultuous Life of America's Prince of Players. The book, published by the University Press of Kentucky, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And you can also follow Terry on Facebook and Instagram. And Terry, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Ira.
Thank you. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.